right? Okay. So, hello everybody. I'm assembling here a 390 FE Ford big block and just document it for whatever reasons. Maybe you can use my tips and information. So this is a standard 64 390 FE block. It's bored 30 over. It's the crank is 20 under. Block was previous ones already redone. Unfortunately, whoever did this used a rod that where do I have it? Hang on. Oh, here. Had obviously a severe bearing damage and used a rod that got too much heat, and you see clear discoloration from the other rods. So, which was one reason for a lot of failures that happened to that engine, including also problem with the piston rings because of too much spark and early detonation, which basically killed all the rings in the second groove. Alright, so I just did slight mods to the block, nothing crazy. Just what you can read normally in the books. I opened up the oil feeder hole that comes from the oil pump into the block. Normally they are much smaller, so I drilled it out a half inch. I drilled 5/16 the oil galley all the way through that opening and chamfered, come around here, and chamfered these oil outlets here in order to make the oil transition as smooth as possible. When you look at a bare block that from Ford that hasn't been touched, you find here sharp corners which create issues with the oil flow, even though Ford always said that the oil pressure on the bottom part of the block is enough, and that can be fairly low. Standard blocks, when they're really hot, could have just 10 psi oil pressure minimum, and then they increase 10 psi by each 1000 rpm. Anyway, we opened that up to give them a little bit more flow. What you can see, I was grinding out a little bit the oil feeder holes for the main bearings in order to line them up. Also factory here, they are not necessarily lined up with the bearings. I did this also here to help the oil flow, and well, I'm nearly assembly with the pistons and the rods, with the exception of number 8, which I now put in. And as you can see, I used RP bolts in the main. I used the original old rod bolts, which is a problem if you don't look at them before. I actually found one of these rod bolts that was already length and not in a good shape, so I had to exchange this one. Let me see if I find it. I threw it already away, but you could see that it was too long and lost already its tension. Why I'm using not ARP bolts? I'm not using ARP bolts because simply I should have pressed them in before I actually went through the rods, because when you press ARP bolts in, always you have to recondition the rods because they are a little bit thicker, 0.001 inch thicker, and if you have already slightly sloppiness from factory, guarantee you that you get an offset in your caps and rods, so you always have to recondition the rods and align bore them, no matter what, when you put different bolts like RP rod bolts in. So, long story short, I decided to use the old ones because I went through this already and decided too late. So anyway, I have them for sale if you need them. So, last piston, number 8. This is a good rod. It was measured. This is a hypotactic pistons, which I normally use also for street engines like this one. This is a regular street engine, not a great super performance engine. It's a flat top pistons with a standard compression. I always try to use chromoly rings. for the simple reason they just, I think, last longer. They just behave better, and they just cost 40-50 bucks more than the regular cast rings, and I think they're worth the money. From what you can see here, how I assembled the piston rings, I assembled them offset. You don't want to have the gap lined up. If you line the gap up, all the compression, all the gases just fall through and by, and you have not a good compression. You always put them in this roughly 60-degree angle in, and on the opposite side you can see where I put the oil ring in. Also here, this is where the main oil ring meets, and this is basically the upper and lower tension ring where I put them also offset. So I make it difficult, just gas can pass by or oil comes up. Alright, you can see it's a 30 over. And I use an old style ring tensioner in order to put the piston into the block, but it works quite well. So always what I do, I look at the position, I always oil. You cannot oil enough because you want to make sure that nothing is dry when you put it in. Particularly when you're not running the block immediately and you maybe have it sit for a couple of months before you run it in. Always oil the heck out of it. In best case, and you see this also for very sensitive parts, I use assembly lube. These old style rings, these notches basically rest on the block while you hammer in the piston. Alright. Alright. Okay, so that's enough tension on the rings. This is the rod, and now we assemble the lower bearing. Wipe it off, make sure there's nothing in it, because you don't want to have something between the bearing and the rod. I regularly use these Cleveland, now Marle bearings. They're pretty good, and also dimensional wise pretty okay. If you grab the bearing, try to grab it from the outer side. Don't grab it on the bearing, because you still, even though all my hands are oily, you still have acid in your skin, and you don't want to have in this tin, acid. It will go out after a while for sure, but it could be that oil is not sticking to that part which you touch. So just be on the safe side. Take a new towel, wipe carefully over it. Okay, this engine will not be put directly into the car, so it will take a while until we run it in. So instead of oil, which I normally use, I use here assembly lube. It just sticks better. You see how thick it is. Distribute it a little bit. Don't forget the sides of the rod, because also they see friction with the other rod or with the camphor of the cam. Okay, I pre-lubed the cylinder walls already. I just stuck my hand in there and put heavy zinc oil into it. You have to protect the crank from these rod bolts being hit. Just use regular 3/8 or 5/16 or whatever fits on that bolt to protect your crank. Alright, make sure you know where the front is. This is the front, this is a notch. Some pistons have an F in it, some pistons have a front in it. Anyway, where the notch is always the front, and you also can see that here you have an offset of the bearing. Ford has that. Here's the camphor of the crank. If you mount the rod the other way, you would disturb that area of the bearing, and probably it will scratch and score very fast, and then you lose oil pressure and all this kind of weird stuff you don't want to have. Plus the Fords have on that side a little squared oil, which lubricates the other side of the cylinder wall when the engine is running. I will show you this when I put the cap on. All right, let's put her in. So the beginning is a little tricky. You need to hold it a little bit until the skirt's coming out, like so. Okay. There you heard it. They came proper in. Use a hammer. Be soft on it. Normally, if everything is oiled and it's not dry, they still go fairly easy in. You don't need to put a lot of force into it. Okay, I stop right here. Also here's some sticky assembly lube on the side and here. Let it run down a little bit. Alright. And then put the rest in. Okay, that's it. Okay. Come on. There you go. Okay. All right. Take a new paper towel, something that's clean. Just wipe the last time over here, over the rod bolts. All right. And now you take the cap, you do the same here. Wipe over it. Make sure there's nothing in there, go with your finger over it. Grab the bearing again on the side, like so. Insert it with this side first. Okay, hold it with the thumb and then just stuff it in. Alright, good. Same procedure here. Wipe over it. Sticky assembly. You can use Lucas, you can use Amsoil, but always use plenty of it. You can't be wrong if you use a lot of this stuff. Particularly again if the engine is not immediately running. Okay, here's a notch. There's your notch. There's your chamfer. There's the offset of the bearing. Here, put it on. Okay, wiggle it a little bit. So now I do something. A machine shop, an owner of a machine shop, an older guy told me, if you use old rod balls, there's always a possibility of a failure. Always. Particularly when you had engines that were running hard. So always look at them. But you never can look into these parts unless you x-ray them. So for example, in order that a rod bolt is losing suddenly tension and the nut is coming off or something else crazy, which then pretty much will kill the entire engine and damage it, probably beyond repair, do just this. A little bit of Loctite. Now, normally, if you use new rod bolts, you don't do this. Under no circumstances. You will always use assembly lube for RP bolts as an example, or as a minimum oil. They are still a little bit oiled, and when you drive this nut down, as you can see, you drive down a little bit your Loctite, and it basically loops for that moment that you torque them down. Why do I'm doing this? Well, certainly if the rod bolt is coming apart, it's not helping. But what I saw on a lot of engines, that these rod bolts getting longer. That means you lose here the tension suddenly, and that means this nut is loose. So now if you have a lot of oil underneath and all these kind of things, it certainly will get loose, and then all of this is happening just, in a matter of seconds. And if that nut is going into that engine, then it's complete game over. So this is just a little bit of insurance. It does not prevent any kind of engine failures. It does not prevent that a rod bolt is eventually completely failing. So if you can, always use a new rod bolt. I didn't do it. That was my failure because I measured everything up front and was ready to put the engine together. So the right way would have been done to get everything out again, get the pistons off, press the ARP bolts in and get the rods line honed. But I want to have that engine together, so I make that shortcut. I hope I'm not paying for it. Learn out of my mistake. If you have the chance and you have everything apart, always put new rod bolts in and have the rods aligned. Okay, so when you torque them down to specification, you need to feel it a little bit. That's at least what I do. I don't like to use machines because I don't feel how it comes together. I don't feel if a bolt is lengthening or not. Here I get a pretty good feeling, and if you had already once in your life a bolt that got longer, it feels weird, you know, it suddenly gets soft and spongy, and then you may torque it down again, and then you can suddenly move your ratchet a little bit further. So that's the reason I don't like to use machines, to torque that down or just assemble it. All right. So last check is then, if everything was measured right and all the parts are good, you didn't do anything wrong, you still should be able to do this, which it does. So I put in my life a lot of engines together. So this is pretty good movement that we have here. It's not stiff. Of course, it has a lot of resistance because of the piston rings. Everything is new. It's not run in yet, but it runs really good. There's no hot spot. There's nothing, which could be a problem. So here you go.